Ladies and gentlemen, io non parlavo italiano. So this is the first problem that we have. I will try to speak slowly English. It's okay. In order to be more clear than quick, and I hope it will be possible to have a common meeting. Before the COVID pandemic, people from Italia were every time among the 10 most present visitors in Auschwitz every year. But now, after 2 years of COVID, I don't know really how it is. So I would like just, for my knowledge, for my, in order to know how I have to speak about Auschwitz, I would like that all the people who already visited Auschwitz raise their hand, please. Yeah, this is the COVID situation. Okay. I will not make an entire lesson about the history. I would like to focus more on the significance of Auschwitz and on what Auschwitz has to tell us today. But before, a few remarks. Auschwitz was a double camp, in fact. It was a concentration camp, like many others, like Dachau, Ravensbrück, Mauthausen-Gusen, Berlin-Belsen, Buchenwald, created in 1940 because the prisons in the occupied by the Germans Poland were full of people. And they didn't know what to do with all those people, because they take the experience of the pre-war Germany and they built an enormous concentration camp. And this was from 1940. And from 1942, it becomes also an extermination camp. It was not clear at the beginning that it would be like this. The extermination camp to eliminate the Europe from their Jewish inhabitants, in general, were not put together with the concentration camp. If you see Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Kulmhof, there were no really concentration camps in those sites. It was some, but far away from some towns, from some, let's say, from the view of people from that time, just extermination camps. Auschwitz, in fact, was both an extermination camp and a concentration camp. And this was a little bit the first important particularism of this slide that helped him to play an important role after the war. The difference between Auschwitz and many other places is not only the number of victims. I remember something like 1.3 at least million of people were conducted to Auschwitz. The majority of them were Jew, and they were killed directly after the arrival. But there were also 150,000 Poles, 24,000 Gypsies, more than 15 or 16,000 Soviet prisoners of wars, and some 20,000 other victims. It was clearly more than many other concentration camps, and more than many other extermination camps also. But it is not the number of victims who create the role of Auschwitz after the war. Treblinka has not so much less victims than Auschwitz. Auschwitz was 1.1 million of victims. Treblinka was something like 900,000, more or less. The role of Auschwitz after the war were certainly created by the survivors. From Treblinka, you've got, I don't know, few survivors. less than 50 probably. Maybe, I don't know, 10 of them, maybe some people who are speaking after the war, who give out their testimonies, who give some books, who give some text for some archives, who make some films, like in the Shoah Foundation in Los Angeles and in other places. And really the survivors gives a special role to Auschwitz. Because the survivors were coming from the concentration camps, that they saw from their own eyes the extermination camp. This is the difference between Auschwitz and, for example, and slow by slow, after the war, the understanding of this fight, before many other, appears in, let's say, the historical knowledge of Europeans. It was, from the beginning, yes, a sort of cemetery, maybe the biggest cemetery in the world without any graves. And it became something that we call after the war a memorial, a lieu de mémoire, Gedenkstätte, luogo di memoria, or something like this in Italian. I don't really like this name because, first of all, it's not a site of remembrance. First of all, it's a site of a crime. It's a very site of a crime. The remembrance is something that has to be built after. It's also a monument, and some officials are coming with their words of officials, with their flowers of officials, with their expression of officials, and with their official photographers also. It's also a museum created very, very early after the war, 2 years after the war. That's why we have so many, I don't know, shoes, suitcases, private belonging to the victims. It's not the case of many other camps in Europe that were created in the late 60s or even after. And now, more and more, it becomes a place of education. Because we have now, before the pandemic, we got 2.3 million of visitors last year before the pandemic in 2019, and more than 60% were young people. So it becomes more and more a place where you go in order to learn something. But the problem is that this learning is still too much historical learning. And it's not a question of history, in fact, that you have to touch if really you want to replace the problem of Auschwitz and the Shoah in the history of Europe. Of course, facts are facts, no doubt. But we don't remember facts only in order to remember facts. And still now, people are coming in order to asking themselves why then something like this happened to the victims. It's an important question. I don't want to criticize it. But I would like more people are coming and think also what me I have to do today with that knowledge. This is the big issue for the future. And if from all Europe and not only Europe, there are so many programs in schools, in some associations, in some educational programs to send young people to see Auschwitz, it's certainly not only in order to have a knowledge about the facts, but because we trust that in the remembrance we can imagine a future, a different future. Remembrance is not something only connected to the past. Remembrance is a key for the future, a real key. Maybe the only one that we have. Maybe. It's like a small child. He's growing, he acquires some experience, helping him to understand how to progress in our world. It doesn't exist in our society. We have to learn from the past, from our experience, in order to change the future. And this is still not functioning exactly like this, and this is maybe my first preoccupation now. We are living in a world more and more difficult. And we are less and less capable to imagine what will be in 10 or in 20 years. Who knows how will look our mobiles in 20 years? You know, the most precious tools that we have, the last things that we put on the table when we are going to sleep, and the first one we catch up when we are leaving, we are standing up in the morning. We don't know what will be in 10 years. We don't know about the future, but we observe a rising of the anti-Semitism in many, many countries. Certainly a rising of many other xenophobia, racism, of some hate speeches, of some, I don't know, brutality, of populism and demagogy in our political lives, in Europe even. We observe a ghettoization, excuse me the term, a ghettoization of our relations. You know, we are all closed in our small groups on Facebook or on Twitter, when we meet only people who are thinking the same as we are thinking. It's every time disturbing to discuss with somebody who is thinking differently than me, of course. This is something very, very, let's say, dangerous in our life. We are closing more and more on ourselves. And the COVID had that, certainly. If you look 3 years ago, or 4 years ago now, the Rohingya, Muslim population in Myanmar, were under serious problems. It was a genocide, in fact. Some 50 or 70,000 were killed, and some 500,000 was running to Bangladesh in order to save their lives. Can you imagine how desperate you must be in order to run to Bangladesh, one of the poorest countries in the world, in order to save your life? I don't think that the papers from the newspapers of Europe on this subject 3 or 4 years ago, if you put them together, would make a book of 120 pages. You know, at the most brutal moment of this genocide of the Rohingya, the United Nations took let's say, voted a document, 1 page and a half maybe, saying that there is some serious information, which is like a quotation already, you can check it, October, I think, 17. There are some serious information about human rights abuses in Myanmar. At the same time, 50,000 people were already killed. They are serious human rights abuses, yes, of course. But we didn't create the United Nations for that. And now, you have 1.5 million, that means more than the whole Auschwitz, Uyghurs put in prisons in China. Prisons that look, if you look in Google Earth, relatively similarly to concentration camps. Because they are also the minority. A minority who would like to have some freedoms in China. Is difficult to be here, but China is a very powerful country. So our newspapers do not really speak about the drama of the Uyghurs in the northern, western China. And you have many other problems in Central Africa, in the Middle East, in many other parts of the world, and you have also problems in our societies, here, very close. But people are still visiting Auschwitz, are still impressed It's normal. I do not criticize it, certainly not. I'm the last one to criticize it. Someone are really shocked. Someone are unable to speak to their parents, to their family, what they saw those many days after the visit. But they are unable to define their own responsibility in their own society. Very close, family, school, city, or at a larger perspective, a region, or something more. And this is something that concerns everybody. Everybody. You know what? That's the two main questions that I hear every day, maybe, in Auschwitz, from visitors, from politicians, from media, from VIPs, from, I don't know, journalists. The first question is, what would we do? What we will be obliged to do? What will we do when the last survivor will disappear? This is the first question. The second question is, what to do in order that more young teenagers come and visit Auschwitz? It's very, very relevant. It shows that we reject our own awareness and responsibility to the survivors who are 90 years old and to the youngest, who are 14, 15, 16 years old. And what is between? Parents like to think, I would like my son or my daughter go and visit Auschwitz. But what about parents and their own responsibility today? No, the responsibility is in the hand of the survivors and the teenagers. This is not very accurate, this is not very adult. And those are really the two most asked questions that I received in Auschwitz. So we are in a difficult situation, and the role of Auschwitz, as I understand it, in the next years, it will be, without losing the history, without losing the past, without losing what is the truth about the Shoah and about the concentration camp, is to develop really a situation when we will be, all of us, more prepared to empathy, to awareness, to responsibility, a sort of visit of Auschwitz that will not only provoke in us a shock about the history, but also a moral anxiety about ourselves. Thank you.
Grazie Piotr CYWINSKI, come avete sentito ci ha spiegato una delle ragioni per cui Auschwitz è diventata così importante, non perché sia stato l'unico luogo in cui si è passati dal campo di concentramento con il sterminio, e neanche tanto per il numero, semplicemente il numero dei morti, ma perché la presenza dei sopravvissuti ha costruito una narrazione nella quale chi stava nella parte di concentramento del campo ha visto lo sterminio. La messa in discussione l'idea che il cimitero senza tombe sia semplicemente un luogo della memoria e soprattutto il luogo di un crimine, anche se il museo che è nato dal 1947 su quei luoghi è diventato un luogo di educazione, diceva per 2,3 milioni di visitatori l'anno prima del Covid, ma poi ha posto la questione sulla quale si è dilungato e sulla quale ha concluso, cosa si impara e chi impara andando ad Auschwitz. Non solo domandarsi perché qualcosa del genere sia accaduto alle vittime, ma perché qualcosa del genere qualcosa del genere può insegnare a noi, cosa si può fare della conoscenza che si genera in quell'incontro, con quel luogo, in quella visita. E ha spiegato come il momento della rimembranza sia un momento che si discussione molto rapidamente in un mondo che evolve a una velocità molto rapida, nel quale ritornano anche i fenomeni di antisemitismo, di xenofobia, di razzismo, di odio, e ha citato due casi importanti nell'Asia sudorientale, il genocidio di Rohingya nel Myanmar 2017, descritto dalle Nazioni Unite con parole di una superficialità che ricordano quella di un tempo, e la carcerazione di 1,5 milioni di persone dell'Uguristan, che è la regione dell'ovest cinese che confina con l'Afghanistan, musulmani che sono sotto persecuzione. E ha finito ricordandosi le due domande che vengono fatte ogni giorno dalle persone, soprattutto le persone importanti, autolocate, che visitano Auschwitz. La domanda: cosa faremo quando si spegnerà la voce dei superstiti? La seconda domanda: come fare a portare qui più giovani? E lui diceva: questo è un meccanismo, un modello interessante di rinuncia alla responsabilità che attribuisce agli adolescenti e ai superstiti, ai novantenni e ai quindicenni, il compito di un ricordo, e la formula con cui ha concluso è quella che quello che deve nascere in questo incontro con questi luoghi non è solo uno shock, ma una ansietà morale che riguarda il nostro presente e il nostro futuro. Ancora grazie direttore CYWINSKI per la presenza.